The text arrived while I was sitting in my favorite chair, the old burgundy recliner that Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary. I was reviewing my Thanksgiving menu one more time, making sure I hadn't forgotten anything for what would be our first holiday gathering since Robert passed away 6 months ago. The familiar ding of my phone interrupted my thoughts, and I glanced down expecting maybe a message from my son David about what time they'd arrive Thursday morning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Instead, I found a message from Stephanie, my daughter-in-law of 3 years, that made my heart sink faster than a stone dropped in deep water. The message was short, direct, and colder than the October wind rattling my kitchen windows. Hi, Eleanor. Just wanted to give you a heads up about Thanksgiving. David and I have been talking, and we've decided that anyone who wants to join us for dinner needs to contribute $500 toward the meal and hosting costs. We're doing something really special this year at our place, and it's going to be expensive. If you can't manage that amount, we totally understand, but you probably shouldn't plan on coming. Thanks for understanding. Stephanie. I read the message 3 times, certain I must have misunderstood something. $500 for Thanksgiving dinner. The holiday that had always been about gratitude, family, and coming together around a simple meal of turkey, and all the fixings that I'd been preparing in this same kitchen for 37 years. I set my phone down on the side table next to my reading glasses and stared at the Thanksgiving menu I'd been working on, written in my careful handwriting on the same yellow legal pad I used every year. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, sweet potato pie, and pumpkin bread. Simple food made with love, the way Robert and I had always done it. My hands were shaking slightly as I picked up my phone again and reread Stephanie's message. The casual way she'd written it, like she was asking me to bring a side dish instead of demanding more money than I spent on groceries in 2 months. The dismissive tone, as if my presence at my own son's Thanksgiving table was optional, contingent on my ability to pay what amounted to a cover charge. I thought about David, my sweet boy who used to help me set the table every Thanksgiving morning, arranging the good china with such care because he knew how much it meant to me. How had he agreed to this? I've been Eleanor Margaret Hoffman for 73 years, and in all that time, I'd never heard of anyone charging their family members to attend a holiday dinner. I grew up during times when people stretched a single chicken to feed 8 people, when my mother could make a feast out of whatever was in the pantry and a lot of love. Even after Robert and I built a comfortable life together, we never forgot where we came from or what really mattered when families gathered around a table. Robert would have been appalled. My husband of 45 years had believed that home was where anyone who needed one was welcome, and our Thanksgiving table had hosted not just family over the years, but neighbors who were alone, David's college friends who couldn't make it home, even strangers we'd met who had nowhere else to go. Robert used to say that the table could always squeeze one more, and somehow it always did. The idea that someone would put a price tag on belonging at that table would have broken his heart. I called my sister Helen first, needing to hear a familiar voice that would help me make sense of what felt like a completely foreign situation. Helen answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful in the way that made me realize how much I'd been counting on normal conversation to steady myself. Eleanor, honey, how are you holding up? I was just thinking about you and wondering about your Thanksgiving plans. Are David and Stephanie coming to you this year? I found myself struggling to find the words, which surprised me. Helen and I had been talking through life's curveballs for over 7 decades, but this felt too strange to articulate. Actually, Helen, something odd just happened. Stephanie sent me a text about Thanksgiving, and I'm not sure I understand what she's asking. What kind of text? I read Helen the message word for word, and the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, Helen spoke, her voice careful and measured in a way that told me she was trying to process something that didn't compute. Eleanor, did you say $500? To attend Thanksgiving dinner? That's what she wrote. I've read it 3 times now, and that's definitely what she's asking for. Helen was quiet again, and I could almost hear her trying to find a diplomatic way to respond. My sister had never been particularly fond of Stephanie, though she'd always been polite about it for David's sake. From the beginning, Helen had felt that Stephanie was more interested in what David could provide than who he was as a person, but we'd both hoped that assessment was unfair. Eleanor, In what world does someone charge their mother-in-law to come to Thanksgiving dinner? I mean, even restaurants don't charge $500 for a holiday meal. What could she possibly be planning that would cost that much? That was exactly what I'd been wondering. I'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners for anywhere from 6 to 20 people over the years. And even when I went all out with prime rib instead of turkey and bought the most expensive ingredients I could find, I'd never spent anywhere close to $500. Even if Stephanie was planning some elaborate catered affair, the idea of asking family members to pay for the privilege of attending seemed fundamentally wrong. Helen, what do? I don't want to cause problems between David and me, but this feels so wrong, I don't even know how to respond. Have you talked to David about this? Maybe he doesn't know what Stephanie sent you. Maybe this is all her idea, and he'd be horrified if he knew. I wanted to believe that was possible, but something about the message suggested otherwise. Stephanie had specifically mentioned that she and David had been talking about this decision together. Still, Helen was right that I needed to hear David's side of this before I did anything else. I'll call him tonight when he gets home from work. Maybe there's an explanation that makes more sense than what I'm thinking right now. What are you thinking right now? I looked around my living room, at the family photos covering every surface, the comfortable furniture that had hosted so many gatherings over the years, the home that Robert and I had filled with love and laughter, and the kind of hospitality that never came with conditions attached. I'm thinking that my daughter-in-law doesn't want me at Thanksgiving dinner, and this is her way of making sure I don't come without having to tell me directly that I'm not welcome. Helen sighed deeply. Oh, Eleanor, I hope you're wrong about that, but honestly, I can't think of any other explanation that makes sense. Who asks their family to pay $500 to come to dinner? After I hung up with Helen, I sat in my recliner holding the phone and thinking about the 3 years since David had married Stephanie. She was beautiful, successful, and smart, everything a mother might want for her son on the surface. But from the beginning, there had been something about the way she looked at our family traditions, our modest home, our simple ways of celebrating, that made me feel like we were being measured and found lacking. The first Thanksgiving after they got married, Stephanie had come to dinner at my house but spent most of the evening on her phone, taking pictures of the food and the table setting with what seemed like barely concealed amusement. When I'd asked if everything was all right, she'd smiled and said everything was so authentic, in a tone that suggested authentic.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Wasn't necessarily a compliment. Last year, they'd opted to spend Thanksgiving with Stephanie's parents in Scottsdale, at what Stephanie described as an exclusive resort, where they did a, quote, reimagined Thanksgiving experience, with locally sourced, organic everything, and a sommelier to pair wines with each course. When they came back, Stephanie had shown me pictures on her phone, and I had to admit the presentation was beautiful, but it looked more like a magazine spread than a family gathering. Now, apparently Stephanie had decided it was time to bring that level of sophistication to our family's Thanksgiving, complete with a price tag that would ensure only certain people could afford to attend. I couldn't help but wonder if that was exactly the point. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at the money demand, but at what it represented. This was the woman my son had chosen to build a life with, and she was treating his family like customers rather than loved ones. She was turning a sacred family tradition into a transaction, and worst of all, she was doing it during my first Thanksgiving without Robert, when I needed my family more than I ever had before. I thought about calling David right then, but I knew he'd still be at work, probably in meetings or dealing with the kind of end-of-day responsibilities that made him unreachable until evening. David worked as a project manager for a construction company, a good job that he'd worked his way up to over the past 10 years, but nothing that would make $500 feel like pocket change to him either. Instead, I found myself walking through my house, looking at it with fresh eyes, trying to see it the way Stephanie might. The furniture was comfortable but not fashionable, chosen for durability and comfort rather than style. The decorations were accumulated over decades of marriage, a mix of things Robert and I had bought together, gifts from friends and family, and craft projects I'd made myself. Nothing matched perfectly, but everything had a story and a place in our family's history. The dining room table was solid oak, a wedding gift from Robert's parents that had hosted countless meals over the years. The chairs didn't all match, we'd added to the set as our family and friend group had grown. But they were sturdy and comfortable, and held memories of everyone who'd ever sat in them. The china cabinet displayed the good dishes we used for special occasions. Nothing fancy or expensive, but plates that had served Thanksgiving dinner to 3 generations of our family. I realized I was seeing my home through Stephanie's eyes, and for the first time it looked shabby and insufficient. But then I caught myself and remembered what Robert used to say about the difference between a house and a home. A house was about appearances, but a home was about the love that lived within its walls. This house had been a home for 45 years, filled with laughter and tears, celebrations and quiet moments. The ordinary magic of daily life lived with someone you loved. Stephanie's demand wasn't really about money, I realized. It was about control, about establishing a new hierarchy, where she got to decide who was worthy of being included in the family's celebrations. And if I paid that $500, I wouldn't just be buying a seat at Thanksgiving dinner. I'd be agreeing that my presence at my son's table was conditional, that my place in his life was something that could be purchased, rather than something that existed because of love and history, and the bonds that tie families together. I made myself a cup of tea and settled back into my recliner to think about what I was going to say when I called David. Part of me hoped that Helen was right, that somehow David didn't know about Stephanie's message and would be as shocked as I was when he heard about it. But another part of me, the part that had been watching my relationship with my son change slowly over the 3 years of his marriage, suspected that David was very much aware of what his wife was doing, and that his silence meant agreement. The afternoon stretched toward evening as I sat there, watching the shadows grow longer across my living room floor, and thinking about all the Thanksgivings this house had seen. Robert and I as newlyweds, nervous about hosting his parents for the first time, David as a toddler, more interested in playing with the turkey wishbone than eating dinner. His teenage years when he'd invite friends whose families were traveling or dealing with difficult times. The year Robert was recovering from his heart surgery and David had driven down from college to help me cook everything because he was worried I was taking on too much by myself. Every one of those Thanksgivings had been about gratitude and connection, about taking time to acknowledge the good things in our lives and the people who made them meaningful. The food was important, but only as a way of showing love and creating an atmosphere where conversation could flow and relationships could deepen. The idea that someone would turn that into a financial transaction felt like a violation of everything the holiday was supposed to represent. When 6 o'clock came and I knew David would be home from work, I picked up my phone and dialed his number, my heart beating faster than usual as I waited for him to answer. He picked up on the 3rd ring, and I could hear Stephanie's voice in the background, along with what sounded like cooking noises. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" David's voice was warm and familiar, the same tone he'd used when calling home from college, and for a moment I almost convinced myself that this was all a misunderstanding that we'd clear up in the next few minutes. "I'm doing all right, sweetheart. I got a text from Stephanie today about Thanksgiving, and I wanted to talk to you about it." There was a pause, and when David spoke again, his voice was more cautious. "Oh, okay. What about it?" "David, she's asking for $500 from anyone who wants to come to Thanksgiving dinner. I'm hoping there's some explanation for this that I'm not understanding, because it seems like a very unusual request." Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear Stephanie's voice more clearly now, though I couldn't make out what she was saying. It sounded like she was asking David who he was talking to. "Mom, let me explain. Stephanie and I have been talking about hosting Thanksgiving this year, and we want to do something really special." She's been researching these amazing caterers who specialize in elevated holiday experiences, and we found someone who can create this incredible meal with all organic, locally sourced ingredients, plus wine pairings and professional service. It's going to be like nothing our family has ever experienced before. I felt something cold settle in my stomach as I listened to David explain, using words that sounded like they'd come straight from Stephanie's vocabulary rather than his own. Elevated holiday experiences. Professional service. These weren't concepts that had ever mattered to the son who used to help me mash potatoes every Thanksgiving morning. "David, that sounds lovely, but I don't understand why everyone needs to pay $500 to attend. Isn't Thanksgiving supposed to be about family gathering together?" "It is, Mom, But this kind of quality doesn't come cheap. The caterer alone is charging $3,000. And that doesn't include the wine, the linens, the professional table settings, or the gratuity. When you break it down per person, $500 is actually pretty reasonable for what everyone's getting. I closed my eyes and tried to picture my sweet David, the boy who used to be perfectly happy with turkey sandwiches made from Thanksgiving leftovers, talking about professional table settings and gratuities, like they were essential elements of a family gathering. Sweetheart, what's wrong with the way we've always done Thanksgiving? I was planning to cook dinner here this year, the same meal I've been making since before you were born. Why do we need caterers and professional service? David was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again there was something defensive in his voice that I'd never heard before when we talked about family traditions. Mom, Stephanie and I are trying to build something new together, create our own traditions that reflect who we are as a couple. We want our friends and family to experience something sophisticated and memorable, not just the same old thing we've always done. The same old thing. The words hit me like a physical blow, reducing 40 years of love and tradition and family memories to something outdated and insufficient. I thought about all the Thanksgivings David had enjoyed in this house, all the times he'd told me how much our family celebrations meant to him, all the friends he'd brought home over the years specifically because he wanted them to experience what he called real family Thanksgiving. David, I need to ask you something directly. Do you really think I should pay $500 to have Thanksgiving dinner with my own son? There was another pause, and I could hear Stephanie's voice again, more insistent this time. When David finally answered, his words came out in a rush, like he was trying to get through an uncomfortable conversation as quickly as possible. Mom, it's not about you paying to have dinner with me. It's about everyone contributing equally to an experience we're all going to enjoy together. Stephanie's put a lot of work into planning this, and it's important to her that everything be perfect. If the cost is a problem, we understand, but we can't make exceptions because it wouldn't be fair to everyone else who's contributing. Everyone else who's contributing. I wondered who that included. Whether Stephanie's family had been asked to pay the same amount. Whether David's friends from work were expected to hand over $500 for the privilege of attending their Thanksgiving dinner. Who else is coming to this dinner, David? How many people are you expecting? Well, Stephanie's parents are flying in from Arizona, and her brother and his wife are coming from Portland. Plus a few of our close friends, maybe 12 people total. I did the math quickly in my head. 12 people at $500 each was $6,000, double what David had said the caterer was charging. Even with wine and extras, it seemed like Stephanie was planning to make a profit on this dinner, or at least ensure that she and David wouldn't have to contribute anything toward the cost. David, if you're only expecting 12 people and the catering costs $3,000, why does everyone need to pay $500? That's $6,000 total. Another pause, longer this time, and when David spoke again, his voice was tight with irritation. Mom, there are other expenses involved. We're renting additional furniture, upgrading our dishes and linens, buying decorations, purchasing higher-end wines. Plus, Stephanie's taking time off work to coordinate everything. It's not just about the food. I felt something crack inside my chest as I listened to my son defend charging his own mother to attend Thanksgiving dinner. This was the boy I'd raised to value kindness over appearances, substance over style, family over everything else. Somewhere along the way, he'd learned to speak a different language, one that reduced love to transactions and turned family gatherings into business propositions. I see, I said quietly. And what if I can't afford to pay $500, David? What if that's more than I can manage right now? There was silence on the other end of the line, and I knew that David was struggling with the implications of what I was asking. He knew his father's death had left me on a fixed income, that I was careful with money in ways that his two-income household didn't have to be. He also knew that asking me to choose between financial hardship and missing his Thanksgiving dinner was asking me to choose between two kinds of pain. Mom, I don't want you to struggle financially, but I also can't ask Stephanie to change all her plans at this point. Maybe we can figure something out. Maybe we can figure something out. The words hung between us like a bridge that might or might not hold weight, and I realized that my son was trapped between the woman he'd married and the woman who'd raised him, trying to find a solution that would satisfy both without fully committing to either. What kind of something, David? I don't know yet. Let me talk to Stephanie and see what she thinks. Maybe you could contribute less money and help with some of the setup work. or contribute in a different way. The suggestion that I might be allowed to work for my dinner, to earn my place at my son's table through labor rather than cash, was somehow more insulting than the original demand for money. I felt years of patience and understanding and maternal diplomacy crumble away, leaving behind something harder and clearer than I'd felt in months. David, let me make something very clear to you. I have been hosting Thanksgiving dinner for 37 years. I have never asked anyone to pay to attend. Not family, not friends, not strangers who needed a place to go. Your father and I believed that hospitality was about opening our hearts and our home, not about creating profit margins and requiring financial contributions. Mom, that's not what this is about. Then what is it about, David? Explain to me why your wife thinks it's appropriate to charge your mother $500 to spend Thanksgiving with her own son. David was quiet for so long, I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was strained and defensive. Mom, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Stephanie is trying to create something beautiful for our family, and all she's asking is for everyone to contribute equally. It's not about the money, it's about everyone being invested in making this special. If it's not about the money, David, then why is money the only acceptable form of investment? Why can't my investment be the 40 years of love and family history I bring to your table? Why can't it be the grandmother I hope to be someday to your children? Why does it have to be cash? I could hear Stephanie's voice in the background again, more urgent this time, and I had the distinct impression that she was coaching David on what to say next. Mom, I think you're overreacting. It's just one holiday, and we're trying to do something different. Can't you just go along with this for Stephanie's sake? Just one holiday. As if Thanksgiving was interchangeable with any other day. As if the decades of tradition and meaning we'd built around this particular gathering could be casually discarded for the sake of keeping peace with a daughter-in-law who saw my presence as optional and conditional. For Stephanie's sake, I repeated slowly. David, what about for my sake? What about considering that this is my first Thanksgiving without your father, and that being with my family might be more important to me than professional table settings and elevated cuisine? The silence stretched between us, and I could feel something fundamental shifting in our relationship. Some understanding that had always existed between us changing into something I didn't recognize. I'm sorry, Mom. I know this is hard for you, but Stephanie is my wife and I have to support her decisions. If you can't participate in Thanksgiving the way she's planned it, then maybe we can get together another time, just the two of us. Another time. Just the two of us. As if I were a family obligation to be managed, rather than the woman who'd given him life and raised him and loved him unconditionally for 32 years. As if my relationship with him could be separated from his life with his wife, compartmentalized and scheduled like a business meeting. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of all the Thanksgivings we'd shared, all the traditions we'd built together, all the love that had filled this house over the decades. And I realized that I had a choice to make, the same kind of choice that defines who we are and what we stand for, when everything we thought we could count on starts to crumble away. David, I said quietly, I want you to know that I love you more than anything in this world. You are my heart walking around outside my body, and that will never change no matter what happens between us. But I will not pay $500 to have Thanksgiving dinner with my own son. And more than that, I will not pretend that what your wife is asking is reasonable or kind or anything I can support. Mom, please don't make this bigger than it is. It's already as big as it is, sweetheart. Your wife has decided that my presence at your Thanksgiving table is worth exactly $500. No more and no less. She's turned our family gathering into a business transaction, and she's done it during the first holiday season I'm facing without your father. If you can't see what's wrong with that, then we have bigger problems than I realized. David was quiet, and I could hear Stephanie's voice again, though I still couldn't make out her words. I have to go, Mom. Stephanie and I need to finish planning the menu. Think about what I said, okay? About, maybe we can work something out. After he hung up, I sat in my recliner, holding the silent phone and feeling more alone than I had since Robert's funeral. Outside, the October evening was settling into darkness, and inside, my house felt empty in a way it never had before, not even in the months since Robert had died. I thought about calling Helen back, but I wasn't ready to say the words out loud yet, wasn't ready to admit that my relationship with my son had just fundamentally changed in ways I couldn't have imagined an hour ago. Instead, I got up and walked through my house again, this time looking at it with my own eyes rather than trying to see it through Stephanie's. This was the house where Robert and I had brought David home from the hospital, where we'd celebrated his first steps and first words and first day of school. This was where David had practiced piano reluctantly but dutifully, where he'd brought girlfriends to meet us, where he'd announced his engagement to Stephanie 3.5 years ago. These walls had heard his laughter and wiped his tears, had sheltered him through childhood illnesses and teenage heartbreak and young adult uncertainties. Now those same walls would witness my first Thanksgiving alone, because my son had chosen his wife's vision of sophistication over his mother's need for family connection. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to create something elevated and memorable, Stephanie was destroying something precious and irreplaceable. I walked into the dining room and looked at the oak table that had hosted so many Thanksgiving dinners, trying to imagine it empty this year, while David sat at some catered affair, eating professionally prepared food off rented dishes, and pretending that what he'd gained was worth what he'd given up. But as I stood there in the quiet of my empty house, I realized something that surprised me with its clarity and strength. I might be alone this Thanksgiving, but I wasn't defeated. I had choices to make, and decisions that would define not just this holiday but the rest of my relationship with my son and daughter-in-law. And for the first time since receiving Stephanie's text, I felt something other than hurt and confusion. I felt determined. The next morning, I woke up with what Robert would have called a bee in my bonnet. That particular combination of righteous indignation and clear purpose that had always preceded my most decisive moments. I made my coffee, settled into my recliner with my yellow legal pad, and began to plan. If Stephanie wanted to charge admission to Thanksgiving dinner, that was her choice. If David wanted to support his wife's decision to turn family gatherings into financial transactions, that was his choice too. But I also had choices, and I was going to make them based on my own values rather than anyone else's demands or expectations. I started by making a list of everyone I knew who might be facing Thanksgiving alone this year. Mrs. Patterson from down the street, whose daughter lived in California and couldn't afford to fly home for the holidays. Tom Rodriguez from Robert's old job, whose wife had died 2 years ago and whose children lived across the country. Sarah Chen, the young nurse from Robert's cardiologist's office who was working double shifts to pay off nursing school loans and couldn't afford to travel home to visit her parents. The list grew longer as I thought about all the people in my community who might be grateful for an invitation to a home-cooked Thanksgiving dinner. People who wouldn't dream of charging their guests or turning hospitality into a business transaction. People who understood that the best things about family gatherings couldn't be catered or purchased or elevated through professional service. Next, I made my traditional Thanksgiving menu, but this time I calculated quantities for 12 people instead of the usual 6 or 8. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, sweet potato casserole, dinner rolls, and 3 kinds of pie. Simple food made with love, the same recipes I'd been using for decades, the kind of meal that invited conversation and created connection, rather than demanding admiration. Then I did something I'd never done before in my 73 years of life. I calculated exactly what it would cost me to prepare this entire meal for 12 people, including the best ingredients I could buy, the highest quality turkey, organic vegetables, real butter, fresh herbs, everything I would need to create a feast that honored both the holiday and my guests. The total came to $187, less than half of what Stephanie was demanding from each person who wanted to attend her elevated Thanksgiving experience. I sat back in my recliner and smiled for the first time since receiving Stephanie's text. I was going to bring something better to Thanksgiving than $500. I was going to bring the spirit of the holiday itself, the understanding that gratitude and generosity and genuine hospitality were worth more than any catered meal or professional table setting. But first, I needed to make some phone calls. The first call I made was to Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor who I'd watched struggle through her own grief after losing her husband 2 years before Robert died. Margaret Patterson was 81 years old, sharp as a tack, and had been living alone since her daughter moved to San Diego for work. I knew she'd been dreading another holiday spent by herself, watching other families, celebrations from her kitchen window while heating up a frozen dinner. "Margaret, it's Eleanor from across the street. I hope I'm not calling too early." Eleanor, honey, you know I'm always up with the sun. How are you holding up? I've been thinking about you a lot lately, knowing this will be your first Thanksgiving without Robert. Her voice was warm and understanding in the way that only comes from someone who's walked the same difficult path. Margaret had been one of the few people who truly understood what I was going through in the months since Robert's death. The way grief could hit you at unexpected moments. The strange emptiness of cooking for one person after decades of cooking for two. That's actually what I'm calling about, Margaret. I'm planning to host Thanksgiving dinner this year, and I was hoping you'd join me. It won't be anything fancy, just traditional home cooking. But I'd love to have you here. There was a moment of silence, and when Margaret spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. Eleanor, are you sure? I know you have your family to think about, your son and his wife. I wouldn't want to intrude on a family gathering. I thought about how to explain the situation without making it sound like Margaret was a consolation prize or a second choice. The truth was, she represented something that had gotten lost in Stephanie's vision of elevated holiday experiences. She was someone who would appreciate simple gestures and genuine connection, someone who understood that the best parts of Thanksgiving couldn't be purchased or professionally arranged. Margaret, my family situation has gotten a bit complicated this year, and I've decided to create my own celebration. I'm inviting people who I genuinely enjoy spending time with, people who will appreciate good food and good company, without any strings attached. You're at the top of that list. Oh, Eleanor. Margaret's voice brightened considerably. I would absolutely love to join you. I've been dreading spending another holiday alone, if I'm being honest. What can I bring? I still make a mean apple pie, and I'd be happy to contribute something. Just bring yourself, Margaret. That's all I need from anyone I invite. After hanging up with Margaret, I felt a surge of something I hadn't experienced since Robert died. Purpose, maybe. Or the satisfaction that comes from doing something meaningful rather than just going through the motions. I was creating something real. Something that honored what Thanksgiving was supposed to be about. My second call was to Tom Rodriguez, who had worked with Robert at the engineering firm for 15 years before they both retired. Tom's wife Carmen had died of cancer the previous spring, and I knew he was struggling with his first holiday season alone. Robert and Tom had maintained their friendship after retirement, meeting for coffee once a week and talking about everything from grandchildren to garden vegetables to the challenges of aging. Tom, it's Eleanor Hoffman. How are you doing? Eleanor, good to hear from you. I'm doing all right, I suppose. Some days are better than others, you know how it is. I've been thinking about you lately, wondering how you're managing. Tom's voice carried the same weary undertone that I recognized from my own conversations with friends and family. The exhaustion of grief. The effort it took to sound normal when everything felt fundamentally changed. I'm managing, Tom, but I'm calling because I have an idea that might help both of us. I'm hosting Thanksgiving dinner this year, and I'd love for you to join me. I know it's hard to face the holidays alone, and I thought maybe we could face them together instead. Tom was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear him considering the offer, weighing his desire for company against his reluctance to be social when he was still deep in mourning. Eleanor, that's very kind of you, but I don't want to be a downer at your family gathering. I'm not very good company these days, and I know your son and his wife probably want to keep things upbeat. Tom, let me be clear about something. This isn't a family gathering in the traditional sense. David and Stephanie have made their own plans this year, so I'm creating a different kind of celebration. I'm inviting people who understand that the holidays can be bittersweet. People who know that sometimes the best gift we can give each other is simply showing up. There was a longer pause, and when Tom spoke again, his voice was softer, more vulnerable than I'd ever heard it. You know, Eleanor, I've been dreading Thanksgiving. Carmen always made such a big deal about the holidays, and the thought of spending the day alone in our house, surrounded by all her decorations and memories, has been keeping me awake at night. If you're sure you don't mind having a sad old widower at your table, I'd be grateful for the company. Tom, I don't see a sad old widower when I think about you. I see Robert's dear friend, someone who made my husband laugh every week for years, someone who has stories and wisdom and a place at my table for as long as you want it. After Tom agreed to come, I felt that sense of purpose growing stronger. I was building something, creating a gathering that would honor the real meaning of Thanksgiving, rather than performing some elaborate charade of sophistication and status. My third call was to Sarah Chen, the young cardiac nurse who had taken such good care of Robert during his final months. Sarah was probably 30 years old, single, working her way through advanced nursing certification while carrying student loan debt that kept her living paycheck to paycheck. I knew she'd been picking up extra shifts during the holiday season, both because the hospital needed coverage and because she needed the overtime pay. "Mrs. Hoffman, how nice to hear from you. How are you doing? I think about you and Mr. Hoffman often." Sarah's voice was as gentle and caring as it had been during those difficult days in the Pragol. "Could contribute 300 instead, and you could help with some of the preparation work. Maybe come over early and help arrange flowers or set up the dining room, that kind of thing." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to process what my son had just said. Stephanie's idea of compromise was to reduce the admission fee and allow me to work as unpaid help in exchange for the privilege of attending my son's Thanksgiving dinner. It was somehow more insulting than the original demand, because it suggested that my value to the family could be measured in a combination of cash and free labor. "David, let me make sure I understand this correctly. Stephanie's compromise is that I pay $300 and work for free in order to attend Thanksgiving dinner with my own son. Mom, don't make it sound worse than it is. Stephanie's trying to find a way to include you that works for everyone. She's already made all these plans, and changing them at this point would be really difficult. And what about Stephanie's family, David? Are her parents paying $300 and providing free labor to attend their daughter's Thanksgiving dinner?" There was a pause, and I could tell David was uncomfortable with the question. "That's different, Mom. They're flying in from out of state, and they're staying with us for the weekend. It's more complicated. It's different because they're her family and I'm just your family. Is that what you're telling me?" "That's not what I meant, and you know it. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone, but you're making this harder than it needs to be." I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at my backyard, where Robert and I had spent so many happy hours working in the garden together. The October afternoon was crisp and clear, the kind of day that usually filled me with gratitude for simple pleasures like sunshine and fresh air in the changing seasons. Today it felt like a reminder of all the beauty I still had access to, all the joy that didn't require anyone else's permission or payment. "David, I want to tell you about my morning. I've spent the last few hours calling people and inviting them to Thanksgiving dinner here at my house. 10 people have already said yes, with 2 more who might be able to come depending on their work schedules." "Mom, what are you talking about? What people?" "I'm talking about Mrs. Patterson from across the street, who's been dreading another holiday alone. Tom Rodriguez from your father's office, who's facing his first Thanksgiving without Carmen. Sarah Chen, the nurse who took such good care of your father, who's working a double shift at the hospital but might be able to stop by afterward. Real people, David. People who understand what Thanksgiving is supposed to be about." David was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was strained. "So you're having your own Thanksgiving dinner, instead of coming to ours?" "I'm having a Thanksgiving dinner that reflects my values instead of attending one that violates them. There's a difference." "Mom, this is ridiculous. It's just money. Can't you just pay the $300 and let this go?" Stephanie's really trying to compromise here. "David, it's not about the money, and it never was about the money. It's about the principle. It's about what it means when someone puts a price tag on belonging to a family. It's about the difference between hospitality and commerce, between love and transaction. You're being dramatic, Mom. It's one holiday, one dinner. Is this really worth damaging our relationship over?" I felt something shift inside me, a clarity that comes when you finally understand what's really at stake in a difficult situation. This wasn't about one dinner or one holiday. This was about what kind of family David and Stephanie were going to build together, what values they were going to prioritize, how they were going to treat people who couldn't meet their financial or social expectations. "David, I'm not the one damaging our relationship. I'm not the one who decided that my presence at your table was worth exactly 3. Connection was too precious to be bought or sold. That evening, as I unpacked my groceries and began the preliminary food preparation that would make Thanksgiving Day run smoothly, I felt more content than I had in months. My house was going to be full of conversation and laughter, appreciation and gratitude. My table was going to host people who understood that showing up was more important than paying up, that belonging couldn't be purchased, but had to be offered and received with open hearts. I thought about David and Stephanie, preparing for their elevated Thanksgiving experience with professional catering and rented linens and guests who had paid for the privilege of attending. I wondered if David would think about our family traditions during their sophisticated dinner, whether he'd remember the simple joy of helping me mash potatoes or set the table with mismatched dishes that held decades of memories. But mostly I focused on my own preparations, on creating something that would honor both Robert's memory and my own values. I was bringing something better than $500 to Thanksgiving. I was bringing the understanding that the best celebrations couldn't be catered or purchased, that genuine hospitality required nothing more than a generous heart and a willingness to share what you had with people who needed it. The next morning brought a phone call I hadn't expected. Helen's voice was unusually serious when she called just after breakfast. "Eleanor, I need to tell you something. I ran into Jennifer Walsh at the grocery store yesterday, and she told me the most disturbing story about her daughter-in-law charging people to come to Thanksgiving dinner. When she described the situation, I realized she was talking about someone we know. It was only when she mentioned the $500 fee that I understood she was talking about David and Stephanie. I sat down heavily at my kitchen table, suddenly understanding that my family's dysfunction was becoming neighborhood gossip. Jennifer Walsh was a kind woman, but she was also someone who knew everyone in our community and wasn't particularly discreet about sharing interesting stories. "What exactly did Jennifer say, Helen?" "She said her daughter told her about this couple who was charging family members to attend Thanksgiving dinner, and how awful it was that someone would put a price tag on family gatherings. Jennifer was horrified by the whole thing. Kept saying she couldn't imagine treating her mother that way. Eleanor, people are talking about this." I felt a mixture of embarrassment and vindication. Part of me was mortified that David and Stephanie's behavior was becoming public knowledge, but another part of me was relieved that other people could see how wrong their demands were. "I didn't tell Jennifer anything, Helen. I haven't been discussing this situation with anyone except you." "You didn't need to tell anyone, Eleanor." Stephanie apparently sent similar messages to several people, and word got around. Jennifer's daughter heard about it from someone else entirely, probably through Stephanie's social circle. The implication was clear. Stephanie hadn't just demanded money from me. She'd sent similar messages to other people, turning what should have been private family communication into a broader social experiment in monetizing holiday hospitality. The fact that it was becoming community gossip suggested that other people were as shocked by the concept as I had been. "Helen, I need to tell you what I've decided to do instead." I explained my alternative Thanksgiving plans, describing each person I'd invited, and why I'd chosen to create my own celebration rather than pay for the privilege of attending David and Stephanie's dinner. Helen listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, what you're doing is beautiful. It's exactly what Thanksgiving should be about, bringing together people who need connection and showing them that they matter. I'm proud of you for choosing this path instead of just going along with something that, $100 plus free labor. I'm not the one who turned a family gathering into a business transaction. Stephanie isn't trying to hurt anyone. She just wants everything to be perfect. Perfect for whom, David? Perfect for her parents who don't have to pay? Perfect for her friends who can afford to treat holiday dinners like exclusive restaurant experiences? What about perfect for your mother, who raised you to believe that family meant something more than a financial arrangement?" David was quiet for a long time, and I could almost feel him struggling with the competing loyalties and expectations that had put him in this impossible position. Part of me felt sorry for him, caught between a wife who demanded his support for decisions that violated everything he'd been taught about family, and a mother who was asking him to remember who he used to be. "Mom, I don't know what you want me to do. Stephanie is my wife. I have to support her decisions, even when they're difficult." "Even when they're wrong, David? Even when they hurt people you love?" "She's not trying to hurt anyone. But she is hurting people, sweetheart. She's hurting me, and she's hurting you, and she's hurting the relationship between our family and the values we used to share. The question is whether you can see that, and whether it matters to you. After I hung up with David, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, processing the conversation and what it meant for my relationship with my son. He was choosing Stephanie's vision over mine, her values over the ones he'd grown up with, her version of family over the one that had raised him. It was painful to accept, but it was also clarifying. I couldn't change David's choices, but I could control my own responses. I could create the kind of Thanksgiving celebration that honored my beliefs about hospitality and family and genuine connection. I could surround myself with people who understood that the best gifts couldn't be purchased, that the most meaningful traditions were built on love rather than money. That afternoon, I drove to the grocery store and began shopping for my Thanksgiving feast. As I walked through the aisles selecting ingredients for dishes I'd been making for decades, I felt a sense of purpose and anticipation that had been missing from my life since Robert died. I was doing something that mattered, creating something meaningful, honoring the memory of all the Thanksgivings Robert and I had shared while building something new for the future. The turkey I selected was smaller than the ones I usually bought when David and Stephanie were coming, but it would be perfect for the group I was expecting. I chose fresh cranberries for homemade sauce, sweet potatoes for casserole, green beans for the dish that had been David's favorite when he was growing up. Each item in my cart represented not just food, but the intention to create joy and connection for people who needed both. As I was checking out, the cashier, a young woman named Maria, whom I recognized from previous shopping trips, commented on the quantity of food I was buying. "Having a big family gathering for Thanksgiving, Mrs. Hoffman?" "I'm having a big gathering," I replied, "but not exactly a family one. I'm hosting friends and neighbors, people who might otherwise spend the holiday alone." Maria smiled as she rang up my groceries. "That sounds wonderful. My grandmother used to do something similar when I was growing up. She said the table could always hold one more, and somehow it always did." "Your grandmother sounds like she understood what hospitality really means." "She did. She always said that the best meals were the ones where people felt welcomed instead of judged, where the company mattered more than the china." As I drove home with my groceries, I thought about Maria's grandmother and the tradition of opening doors and hearts to people who needed both. It was an old-fashioned concept, maybe, in a world that increasingly measured everything in terms of financial value and social status. But it was also a timeless one, rooted in the understanding that hospital, when she'd taken extra time to explain procedures to me and make sure I understood what was happening with Robert's treatment. She'd been one of the few bright spots during a very dark time, treating both Robert and me with the kind of compassion that couldn't be taught or mandated. "I'm doing better, Sarah. Thank you for asking. I'm calling because I'm hosting Thanksgiving dinner this year, and I was hoping you might be able to join me. I know you're probably working that day, but if you have any time off, I'd love to have you here." "Oh, Mrs. Hoffman, that's so sweet of you to think of me. I am working Thanksgiving Day, but I'm off Thursday evening. Are you sure you want a tired nurse showing up at your dinner?" "Sarah, you took care of my husband with such kindness during the hardest time of our lives. Having you at my Thanksgiving table wouldn't be charity on my part, it would be an honor. Besides, I happen to know that tired nurses are some of the best dinner guests in the world. You appreciate good food and you have amazing stories." Sarah laughed, a sound I remembered from the hospital when she'd managed to find moments of lightness even during difficult shifts. "You know what, Mrs. Hoffman, I would love that. I was planning to grab something from the hospital cafeteria and collapse on my couch, but a home-cooked meal sounds like heaven. What can I bring?" "Just yourself, Sarah. Just yourself." As I continued making calls throughout the morning, I felt like I was weaving together a tapestry of connections that had nothing to do with blood relations or social obligations. Each person I invited brought something valuable to the table, not in terms of money or status, but in terms of shared humanity and genuine appreciation for simple kindness. I called my former neighbor, Jim Walsh, whose wife had moved him into assisted living after her stroke, but who still had good days when he could enjoy outings and social interaction. I invited Rosa Martinez, the woman who cleaned the church where Robert and I had attended services for 30 years, whose own family lived too far away to visit for Thanksgiving. I reached out to Dr. Patel's receptionist, Linda, who had always been kind to me during Robert's medical appointments, and who mentioned once that she usually spent holidays alone because she'd never married or had children. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Initial surprise that I was thinking of them, concern that they might be intruding on a family gathering, then genuine gratitude when they realized I was creating something different, something based on inclusion rather than exclusion. By noon, I had 10 people confirmed for Thanksgiving dinner, with the possibility of 2 more who needed to check their work schedules. None of them had asked what they could contribute financially. Several had offered to bring dishes or help with preparation, offers I'd gratefully accepted because they came from a spirit of genuine reciprocity rather than demanded payment. I was making notes about food quantities when my phone rang. David's name appeared on the caller ID, and I felt my stomach tighten with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Part of me wondered if he'd come to his senses overnight, realized how wrong Stephanie's demand had been, and called to apologize. Another part of me suspected this wasn't going to be the conversation I was hoping for. "Hi, sweetheart. How are you today?" "I'm good, Mom." "Listen, I talked to Stephanie last night after we hung up, and she feels bad about how the whole Thanksgiving thing came across. She wanted me to call and see if we could work something out." I sat down in my recliner and prepared myself for whatever compromise David and Stephanie had devised. Based on our previous conversation, I wasn't optimistic that their solution would address the fundamental problem with charging family members to attend holiday dinner. "What kind of something, David?" "Well, Stephanie realizes that $500 might be more than you can easily afford right now, especially with Dad's medical bills and everything. So she thought maybe you violated your principles." "Thank you, Helen. It feels right. Even though it's painful to know that David won't be there. Maybe this will help David understand what he's lost by supporting Stephanie's decision. Sometimes people need to see the contrast between what they chose and what they gave up." After talking with Helen, I spent the morning continuing my Thanksgiving preparations. I made pie crusts and cranberry sauce, cleaned my good china, and pressed the tablecloth that Robert and I had used for special occasions. Each task felt purposeful and meaningful, part of creating something that would bring joy to people who deserved it. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was my other neighbor, Frank Morrison, whose wife had died 5 years earlier, and who had been struggling with increasing social isolation since retiring from his job as a high school principal. "Eleanor, I hope I'm not bothering you. Margaret Patterson mentioned that you're hosting Thanksgiving dinner this year, and she thought I might be welcome to join you. I don't want to impose, but I've been facing another holiday alone, and the invitation sounds wonderful." Frank's voice carried the same loneliness I'd heard in my other guests' voices, the particular sadness of people who had once been part of couples or families and now found themselves adrift during holidays that emphasized togetherness and connection. "Frank, you wouldn't be imposing at all. I'd be delighted to have you join us. Margaret was right to think you'd be welcome here." "Are you sure? I know you have your family to consider, and I don't want to intrude on a family gathering." I realized I was going to have to explain the situation to Frank, at least partially, in order for him to understand why his presence would enhance rather than complicate my Thanksgiving celebration. "Frank, this year I'm hosting a different kind of Thanksgiving. I'm bringing together friends and neighbors who might otherwise spend the holiday alone, people who will appreciate good food and good company without any complicated expectations." "You fit that description perfectly." "That sounds wonderful, Eleanor. What can I bring?" "I'm not much of a cook, but I can pick up something from the bakery or contribute in some other way." "Just bring yourself, Frank. That's all any of us need from each other." After Frank agreed to come, I realized I now had 12 confirmed guests for Thanksgiving dinner. 12 people who understood that the best celebrations were built on inclusion rather than exclusion, on generosity rather than commerce, on shared humanity rather than shared bank account balances. That afternoon brought another unexpected phone call, this one from someone I hadn't heard from in months. Carol Stevens was Robert's sister, a woman I'd always gotten along with but who lived several states away and maintained only occasional contact with our family. "Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me calling out of the blue like this. I talked to my son Michael yesterday and he told me something that has been bothering me ever since. Apparently, David's wife is charging people money to attend Thanksgiving dinner at their house. Michael heard about it through his girlfriend, who knows Stephanie through work connections. I closed my eyes and realized that my family's private drama was spreading even beyond our immediate community. Carol lived 3 states away, but word had still reached her through the interconnected network of relationships and social circles that make up modern life. Carol, I'm not sure what you've heard, but yes, David and Stephanie have decided to charge guests for their Thanksgiving dinner this year. Eleanor, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. In all my 78 years, I have never heard of such a thing. What kind of person charges family members to come to holiday dinner? What did you tell them? I explained the situation to Carol, including David's attempts to compromise and my decision to host my own celebration instead. Carol listened with increasing dismay, occasionally making sounds of disbelief and disapproval. Eleanor, I am so sorry this is happening to you, especially during your first holiday season without Robert. That boy was raised better than this, and I cannot understand how he's allowing his wife to treat you this way. Carol, I think David is caught between competing loyalties, trying to support his wife while maintaining his relationship with me. It's not an easy position for him to be in. There's nothing difficult about it, Eleanor. Family doesn't charge family for holiday dinners. Period. End of discussion. If David can't see that, then he's forgotten everything he was taught about what matters in life. Carol's indignation on my behalf was both comforting and embarrassing. I appreciated her support, but I was also aware that my family's dysfunction was becoming a topic of conversation among people who barely stayed in touch with us most of the year. What are you planning to do instead, Eleanor? Please tell me you're not going to spend Thanksgiving alone. I described my alternative celebration, and Carol's response was immediate and enthusiastic. Eleanor, that is exactly what Thanksgiving should be about. You're creating something beautiful and meaningful, something that honors the real spirit of the holiday. I wish I lived closer so I could join you. You're welcome anytime, Carol. Distance is the only thing that would keep you away. You know what, Eleanor? I think I'm going to drive down for your dinner. It's been too long since I've seen you, and after what you've been through this year, I want to be there to support you. Besides, I'd rather spend Thanksgiving with people who understand what family really means than sit at home feeling sorry for myself. Carol's unexpected decision to drive several hours to attend my Thanksgiving dinner felt like a gift I hadn't known I needed. She represented family in the truest sense, someone who was willing to make an effort to be present during difficult times, who understood that showing up mattered more than convenience or social expectations. Carol, are you sure? That's a long drive, and you don't know any of the other people I've invited. Eleanor, I'm 78 years old, and I've learned that the best people are usually the ones you meet by accident rather than obligation. If you trust these folks enough to invite them to your table, then I trust your judgment enough to want to meet them. After Carol agreed to come, I realized I needed to adjust my food quantities again. 13 people would require a larger turkey and more side dishes, but it also meant more conversation, more connection, more of the energy that makes gatherings memorable for all the right reasons. That evening, as I updated my shopping list and menu plans, I felt a sense of anticipation that had been missing from my life for months. I was creating something that mattered, bringing together people who would appreciate both the food and the fellowship, who understood that the best celebrations couldn't be purchased but had to be built through care and intention and genuine hospitality. My phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment I hoped it might be David, calling to apologize and ask if he could join my celebration instead of Stephanie's monetized version. Instead, it was a message from an unknown number that turned out to be from Stephanie herself. Eleanor, David told me you're planning your own Thanksgiving dinner instead of joining ours. I want you to know that I think you're making a mistake, and you're going to regret missing this opportunity to be part of something special that David and I are creating together. I hope you'll reconsider. But if not, I hope your alternative celebration goes well. Stephanie. I read the message twice, struck by its combination of passive aggression and manufactured concern. Stephanie wanted me to know that I was missing out on something special, but she still wasn't willing to acknowledge that charging family members for holiday dinner was inappropriate. She hoped my celebration would go well, but she also wanted me to feel like I was making a mistake by choosing my own values over her demands. I deleted the message without responding. Stephanie had made her Position clear. And I had made mine. There was nothing more to discuss. No compromise that would bridge the gap between someone who believed family love could be monetized and someone who believed it was priceless. Instead, I focused on the preparations that would make my own celebration everything I wanted it to be. Real food made with love. Real people gathered in gratitude. Real connection built on mutual respect rather than financial transactions. It was going to be a Thanksgiving worth remembering. For all the right reasons. Thanksgiving morning arrived with the kind of crisp November sunshine that makes everything feel possible. I woke up early, not from anxiety, but from genuine excitement about the day ahead. My kitchen was already filled with the sense of pumpkin pie and fresh bread that I'd baked the night before, and the turkey was ready to go into the oven. By 8 in the morning, I was deep into my cooking routine, the same rhythm I'd followed for decades but with a different energy this year. Instead of cooking out of obligation or tradition, I was cooking out of joy, preparing food for people who would genuinely appreciate both the effort and the result. Margaret Patterson arrived at 10 with her promised apple pie and an offer to help with whatever needed doing. We worked together in comfortable companionship, peeling potatoes and preparing vegetables, while sharing stories about our late husbands and the holidays we'd celebrated over the years. Tom Rodriguez showed up shortly after, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the first smile I'd seen from him since Carmen's funeral. He immediately rolled up his sleeves and asked what he could do to help, falling naturally into the easy camaraderie that had always characterized his friendship with Robert. One by one, my guests arrived throughout the morning and early afternoon, each bringing something valuable that couldn't be measured in dollars. Sarah Chen appeared after her hospital shift, exhausted but grateful, carrying flowers she'd picked up from the grocery store. Frank Morrison brought homemade dinner rolls that he'd apparently been perfecting since his retirement. Carol arrived from her long drive with enough energy to immediately start helping with final preparations. What struck me most was how naturally everyone interacted, as if they'd been gathering together for years rather than meeting for the first time. Shared circumstances, similar values, and genuine appreciation for simple hospitality had created instant connections among people who might never have met under other circumstances. At 2 o'clock, we all gathered around my dining room table, the same oak table that had hosted so many family celebrations over the years. But this time, instead of feeling nostalgic for what was missing, I felt grateful for what was present. 12 people who had chosen to spend their holiday together, who understood that the best gifts couldn't be purchased. I asked Tom to say grace, knowing that his years of marriage to Carmen, a devoutly religious woman, had given him experience with leading prayers. His words were simple and heartfelt, thanking God for bringing us together, for the food we were about to share, and for the connections that had formed among strangers who were becoming friends. As we began passing dishes around the table, conversation flowed as naturally as wine from Carol's bottle. Stories emerged about childhood Thanksgivings, beloved family recipes, memories of people we'd loved and lost. Sarah shared funny anecdotes from her nursing shifts. Margaret told stories about her daughter's life in California, and Frank regaled us with tales from his years as a high school principal. The food was perfect, not because it was professionally prepared, but because it was made with care and served with love. My turkey was moist and flavorful, the stuffing was exactly the right consistency, and the sweet potato casserole earned compliments that made my heart swell with pride. But more than that, everything tasted better, because it was shared among people who were truly grateful to be there. Around 4 o'clock, as we were finishing our pie and coffee, my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, and the table grew quiet as everyone sensed the significance of the call. I excused myself and stepped into the kitchen to answer. "Mom, how's your day going?" David's voice sounded strained, different from his usual confident tone. "It's been wonderful, sweetheart. Absolutely wonderful. How was your dinner?" There was a pause, and when David spoke again, I could hear something that might have been regret in his voice. It was fine. Different than what I expected, I guess. The food was good, very sophisticated. Stephanie was happy with how everything turned out. "I'm glad Stephanie got what she wanted, David. That's what matters most." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I can hear people talking in the background. You really did have your own dinner, didn't you?" "I did." 13 wonderful people who understand what Thanksgiving is supposed to be about. We've been here since noon, just talking and laughing and enjoying each other's company. It's been the best holiday I've had since your father died. The silence stretched between us, and I could almost feel David processing the implications of what I'd said. While he'd been eating professionally catered food with people who'd paid for the privilege of attending, I'd been surrounded by genuine warmth and connection that couldn't be purchased. Who did you invite, Mom? Neighbors, friends, people from the community who might have otherwise spent today alone. Your Aunt Carol drove down from Pennsylvania. Sarah Chen, the nurse who took care of your father, stopped by after her shift at the hospital. People who appreciate hospitality without expecting it to come with a price tag. David was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable than I'd heard it in months. Mom, I think I might have made a mistake. What kind of mistake, David? About today. About the whole thing with Stephanie's dinner plans. Sitting there with people who paid to be there, eating food that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. It didn't feel like Thanksgiving. It felt like a business event. I looked back toward my dining room, where my guests were still gathered around the table, sharing stories and laughter that would continue long after the dishes were cleared away. What did feel like Thanksgiving, David? What do you remember about the holidays we used to have? I remember helping you in the kitchen, setting the table with the good china, everyone talking at once and laughing about things that happened years ago. I remember it feeling like home, like family, like something that mattered because of who was there, not what we were eating. Those feelings don't require professional catering, David. They can't be purchased or elevated or improved through expensive ingredients and formal service. I know that now, Mom. I think I've known it all along, but I got caught up in Stephanie's vision of what our life together should look like. I forgot what actually matters. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of tension that had been there since Stephanie's first text message. David was remembering who he used to be, recognizing the difference between genuine connection and manufactured experiences. David, it's not too late. There's still pie left, and everyone would love to meet you. You could drive over right now and spend the evening with people who would welcome you without conditions. Another pause, and I could hear Stephanie's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. I can't, Mom. Stephanie's parents are still here, and we have plans for the rest of the evening, but maybe we could get together soon, just you and me, and talk about things. I'd like that, David. I'd like that very much. After we hung up, I returned to my dining room where my guests were still engaged in animated conversation. Carol looked up at me with raised eyebrows, clearly curious about the phone call but too polite to ask directly. Everything all right, Eleanor? She asked, gently. I think it might be, I replied, settling back into my chair. I think it just might be. The rest of the afternoon passed in the kind of comfortable companionship that makes time seem irrelevant. No one seemed eager to leave, and I found myself hoping the gathering would continue well into the evening. These weren't people who had paid for a specific experience with a predetermined end time. They were friends who had found each other and were reluctant to let the magic of the day dissolve. As evening approached and my guests finally began to gather their coats and prepare to leave, each person took time to express their gratitude for the invitation and the day we'd shared. Margaret hugged me tightly and whispered that this had been the best Thanksgiving she'd had since her husband died. Tom shook my hand with tears in his eyes, saying he'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of a real family celebration. Sarah was among the last to leave, and she pulled me aside as she was putting on her coat. Mrs. Hoffman, I want you to know that what you did today was extraordinary. You took a group of strangers and made us feel like family, and you did it at a time when you could have easily focused on your own grief and loneliness. That takes real strength and generosity. Sarah, you all gave me as much as I gave you, maybe more. This day reminded me that family isn't just about blood relations or social obligations. It's about people who choose to care about each other. After the last guest left, I stood in my dining room looking at the empty table with its scattered napkins and wine glasses, the remnants of a celebration that had exceeded all my expectations. The house felt full despite being empty, warm with the lingering energy of genuine connection and shared gratitude. I thought about David and Stephanie's dinner, wondering if their expensive catered meal had created any lasting memories or meaningful connections. I thought about the people who had paid $500 for the privilege of attending, whether they'd felt truly welcomed or simply tolerated as paying customers. But mostly, I felt proud of what I'd accomplished. I'd taken Stephanie's attempt to exclude me and turned it into an opportunity to include others. I'd transformed a source of hurt into a catalyst for genuine hospitality. I'd proven to myself that the best celebrations couldn't be purchased, only created through intention and care and the willingness to open both your door and your heart. 2 days later, David called again. This time his voice was clearer, more determined. "Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about how it's not too late." Stephanie and I had a long conversation after her parents left, and I told her how I felt about the whole Thanksgiving situation. We disagree about some things, but we both agree that our relationship with you matters more than any dinner party. What does that mean, David? It means I'm coming over for coffee this afternoon, if you'll have me. Just me, so we can talk without any distractions or competing agendas. I want to apologize properly, and I want to understand how we got so far off track. That afternoon, David sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where he'd done homework as a child, and we talked more honestly than we had in years. He acknowledged that Stephanie's demands had been unreasonable, that he should have stood up for me sooner, that he'd lost sight of the values he'd been raised with in his attempt to support his wife's vision of their social life. I told him about my Thanksgiving guests, about the connections that had formed and the gratitude that had filled my house. I explained that what I'd brought to the holiday was something better than money. The understanding that genuine hospitality creates community, that real families are built on choice rather than obligation, that the best celebrations honor people rather than impress them. By the time David left that evening, something had shifted in our relationship. Not back to where it had been before, but forward to something new, something built on adult understanding rather than parental authority, on mutual respect rather than assumed obligation. Stephanie and I would probably never be close, but David and I had found our way back to each other. And that, I realized, was the best gift I could have received from a Thanksgiving that had started with exclusion and ended with inclusion, that had begun with hurt and ended with healing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.